7% of adults in the United States can meet all 5 measures of optimal metabolic health. We've gotten heart disease very wrong. No, heart disease is not inevitable, and we can prevent it. We can stop it from getting worse, and I've even seen reversal.
Is there any way that people would know from their home they're on a trajectory for heart disease?
The answer to that is yes.
Dr. Phillip Ovadia is a board-certified heart surgeon, author, speaker, and metabolic health expert who advocates for preventing heart disease through diet and lifestyle changes rather than relying solely on surgery and medication.
As a heart surgeon, I've done over 3,000 heart surgeries. I've been dealing with heart disease now for my 25-year career. For much of that time, I was an unhealthy heart surgeon. I was morbidly obese. I was pre-diabetic. At one point, I kind of recognized that I was headed for my own operating table. I've now lost 100 pounds. I've been able to maintain that weight loss. I now maintain excellent health. I'm in better health today as a 50-year-old than I was as a 30-year-old. And what changed is what I eat.
If you only got to choose 4 foods to eat that's going to help you have a healthy heart, what 4 foods are you going to choose?
I would probably say steak, 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 and steak. The biggest mistake I think people make around what they eat is they don't. And that is what I would say is the biggest commonality among the people that I operate on.
Hey guys, so many people don't know that all the social media content produced on this channel is created by just 2 people. It's my husband and I behind the scenes doing all of the thumbnails, scripting, filming, editing, creating all of the TikToks, Instagram posts, Facebook stories, newsletters, and we absolutely love getting to do this work. And we just ask that if you guys have ever enjoyed this content, the message that we're putting out, and all of the time, love, and work we put into these videos, that you consider subscribing to the channel and supporting our team. And genuinely, all the brands and sponsors who we support on this channel are particularly picked. We are very picky about who we work with and who we support because we only want to be representing brands that we genuinely use and think would be of value to the majority of people. And one of our sponsors is Bond Charge. And one of the products I really love is their infrared sauna blanket. Eventually, Bryce and I would love to have our own huge sauna in our home, but they're pretty expensive and we just don't have the space for a big sauna in our house right now. And having the sauna blanket is something convenient and easy, and we can store it up and put it away in our closet so it's not in our living space, and we can take turns using it. And what we love about having the sauna blanket is it helps us relax in the evening time, soothe our muscles and joint pain. It can help lower blood pressure and improve blood circulation. It's also a way to sweat, get out some toxins. Red light therapy can also help with skin health, so helping with acne, blemishes, sunspots, wrinkles. Red light therapy penetrates deep into the skin and helps our skin's production of collagen, making our skin look more glowy and youthful. So for us, it's just a really nice product that can help with heart health, skin health, and overall relaxation and our sleep. Bond Charge offers so many different products, different sleep tools and longevity products, and you can find a link in the video description to get 15% off of any of Bond Charge's products, or you can use discount code Lillie at checkout to get 15% off. Now let's jump into the video. Dr. Phillip Ovadia. Right now, we have rising rates of heart disease, and I think that this conversation is going to be so important for people to maybe learn and have hope that it's not an inevitable thing and a doomed fate. But just to start with maybe an icebreaker question, if you only got to choose 4 foods to eat for the rest of your life that's going to help you have a healthy heart, what 4 foods are you going to choose?
Yeah, great question to open. And I would probably say steak, 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 and steak, but we'll broaden it out a little bit. For me, it's probably going to be a steak, eggs. I'm going to throw seafood in there, probably salmon or tuna. For a 4th one, maybe I'll throw in some lamb, is probably my other favorite red meat to eat. And I think all of those are very heart healthy. And of course, that's going to be shocking to most people listening to it because, with the exception of the salmon, they've been told their entire life that all of those things are unhealthy for the heart.
Right. So how did that start where people started hearing this message? Why did people hear for so long that we want to limit our fat, we want to limit our red meat? And what made you change your mind, or what did you learn to make you now give the answer that you just gave?
Yeah, so I'll start with what made me change my mind. And what made me change my mind is I saw what I had been told, what I had been educated to do and to tell my patients wasn't working. It wasn't working for me personally, it wasn't working for my patients. As a heart surgeon, I've obviously been dealing with heart disease now for my 25-year career, done over 3,000 heart surgeries. For much of that time, I was an unhealthy heart surgeon. I was morbidly obese. I was pre diabetic. And at one point, I kind of recognized that I was headed for my own operating table. And I was at a loss because I was, I think, doing a pretty good job of following the advice that I had been taught to give: eat less, move more, eat a low fat diet, minimize, avoid things like red meat. And like I said, I was getting progressively unhealthier. And then, I started to think about, like, why am I so busy as a heart surgeon? If this is the answer to heart disease, and if we've been giving this advice for 70 years, right? This goes back to the 1950s, is when we really started down this pathway. Why isn't it working? And that led me to ask some different questions. I started coming across different information, and that opened my eyes to the fact that we've gotten heart disease very wrong. We don't understand what is truly causing it. And that leads us to give poor advice. After 70 years of giving the same advice, if the disease you're trying to battle keeps getting worse, you really got to stop and say, maybe our underlying assumptions are wrong. But the medical system seems very hesitant to do that.
You mentioned that you were someone who was gaining weight and becoming pre diabetic. So, why do you think that happened in the first place? Because I feel like nowadays we don't just eat because we're hungry. Some people are eating because they're bored or they're stressed or they're at a social event. And so, yeah, for you, why do you think that you gained weight initially?
Yeah, I have to point to the food that I was eating because that's what I've changed to overcome that. My life hasn't gotten any less stressful, if anything more stressful, but I've now been, I've lost 100 pounds. I've been able to maintain that weight loss. I now maintain excellent health. I'm in better health today as a 50-year-old than I was as a 30-year-old. And what changed is what I eat. And yes, I acknowledge that all those things you mentioned, right? They influence what we eat, but ultimately when I changed what I eat, when I eliminated processed food, went on a low carbohydrate and then a carnivore diet, coming up on 7 years on a carnivore diet, I don't find myself reacting to the stress of my life the same way. I get better quality sleep, and I just kind of have more of a drive to be more active, physically, in terms of doing things like exercise. So I think they all play in and they all feed off of each other. But if we're going to make changes, it really has to start with what we're eating first and foremost.
For you, nowadays I feel like the word carnivore gets a little bit muddled and I don't know, like, does that mean you have dairy? Do you drink coffee? Do you put seasonings? Occasionally will you eat like an avocado? What does eating carnivore mean to you?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, right? It doesn't need to mean the same thing for everyone. And I also tell people that carnivore isn't the only approach that works. My overall advice focuses on eating whole, real food and maintaining your metabolic health. That's sort of the outcome for success that I look at. Some people might do that with different strategies. Carnivore for me just is kind of easy and a simple concept. And that's why I stick with it. For me, yes, I incorporate dairy. I do drink coffee. I use seasonings. And like you mentioned, I even have an occasional avocado or some coconut oil or things like that. But, day to day, 99% of what I eat is animal products, and that's going to be meat, eggs, dairy, and some seafood. And depending on what issues you're dealing with, what your goals are, and where you're starting from. I think that is what you should be looking at to figure out, okay, which of these approaches are going to work best for me. But first and foremost, the rule for me when it comes to food, and the rule I encourage my patients to follow is eat real food. We got to start there. I believe that elimination of processed food is the most important thing we can do when we're looking to take a metabolically healthy approach to our diet.
For people, if they don't know, what does the term real food mean? Does things like bread count as real food, pasta, peanut butter? Like, what would be considered a real food?
Yeah, so eat the things that grow in the ground and eat the things that eat the things that grow in the ground. So really animals, plants. The other rule is you want to eat them basically as close to nature made them. So when we start getting into things like wheat and processing it into bread and pasta, I don't think that's a great idea. I think you eat your meat, you eat your veggies, you want some fruit, that might be okay. Again, it depends on where you're starting from and where you're trying to get to. Sugar, I think, is one of the problematic components of the food that we eat that you need to be careful around. But try and eat these things as close to they come from nature, and that's going to lead you to the most success. I don't really tell people that you can't eat X or Y, right? It's all about understanding what impact that particular food might have on you, figuring out if that's going to fit within your goals, fit with what you're trying to accomplish, and most importantly, that you're making a conscious decision around that. The biggest mistake I think people make around what they eat is they don't think about what they're eating. And like you talked about earlier, right? We eat because it's available and other people around us are eating these things. And when we just stop and think about what we are eating and why we're eating it and how it fits within our overall goals, that is really what keeps you sort of on the correct path. It's when we become unintentional about our eating and we just start eating what's available, what's around us, what's easiest, that we get into trouble.
Who is your average patient coming in? Like, what do they look like? What is their lifestyle like? Or is it purely genetics that they're coming in and needing a heart surgery?
Yeah, great question. One of the interesting things that has happened over my career, when was training and starting my career, 20, 25 years ago, the average age of the people we would operate on was 60s and 70s. That has gotten younger. I would say my average age is now in the 50s, and it's not unusual that I'm operating on people in their 40s and in their 30s these days. So that has been a very dramatic shift. And that's a pretty scary shift, when you think about it. Genetics, I think, plays very little role in this. It is our habits, right? One of the sayings I like is, genetics loads the gun, but our habits pull the trigger. I think that's very true. Yes, there are people that have genetics that are going to make them more susceptible to these bad habits. And on the flip side, we all know people that eat bad diets and smoke and they never get heart disease. But that's, pretty rare on the other maybe genetic side of things. Heart disease is a disease of insulin resistance. And that is what we need to recognize. And that is what we need to talk about. And that is what I would say is the biggest commonality among the people that I operate on. Now, the other commonality is most of them don't know that. Their doctors have never talked to them about insulin resistance, despite the fact that they maybe have been diabetic for many years. And some of them aren't, but have insulin resistance that their doctors haven't even figured out. The last commonality that I see in my patients is that their doctors have not been able to inform them about what's really causing their heart disease. Honestly, what's sad is their doctors don't even think about it. The medical system largely views heart disease as something that's almost inevitable these days, right? And it's so common that I could see how you make that mistake. But what I have tried to do now, and what I tried to do is empower patients to understand that no, heart disease is not inevitable and we can prevent it. We can stop it from getting worse. And in some cases, I've even seen reversal of heart disease, improvement of heart disease. And we need to tell patients that that is very possible. And again, the focus needs to be on what's really causing the heart disease, which is insulin resistance, the medical term, or just poor metabolic health, the more sort of general term for that.
And so, what's driving insulin resistance and poor metabolic health? Is it only food? Is it sleep? Is it not getting enough sunshine or activity? Is it stress? Is it alcohol, cigarettes? What's driving metabolic disease?
Yeah, so what we eat is the primary driver of the metabolic disease. Now, most of what you mentioned also plays a role, right? And I talk about the pillars being what we eat, what we do, our activities, how we sleep, and how we manage our stress. And sunlight is certainly included in what we do, right? Our habits. So those are all important, but food is first and foremost. If you're not getting what you're eating right, you really can't overcome that with all that other stuff. And if you do get what you eat right, you probably have a little bit more leeway on the other stuff. But it's all important. It all plays into each other, but it starts with what we eat. That is the primary thing we need to be looking at when we're trying to fix insulin resistance, which is the primary thing driving heart disease.
Is there a way that somebody could, from their house, without going to a doctor, be able to kind of like self diagnose, I guess? I've heard people say before, like if you rub a string maybe on your hand, then you would be able to feel your senses, it would like feel differently. Is there any way that people would know from their home that they're on a trajectory for heart disease?
Yeah, I haven't heard about the string on the hand. So, I always talk about the five basic measures of metabolic health, and two of them you truly can do at home. One is your waist circumference, right? So you just take the tape measure, you measure kind of at the level of your belly button. And if you're a man, you want that to be less than 40 inches. If you're a woman, you want it to be less than 35 inches. And then number two that you can do at home is your blood pressure. You want your blood pressure to be less than 130 on the top number, less than 85 on the bottom number, and that should be without medication. If you're already on blood pressure lowering medication, that's an indicator that you're not metabolically healthy. Now, the other three basic measures of metabolic health you do need blood work for. Honestly, you can order your blood work from home. So I guess technically you could do this at home, but you might want to go through your doctor. But you need to know your fasting blood glucose. So how much sugar is in your blood when you haven't eaten. And that number should be less than 100 milligrams per deciliter. Some people will instead use the hemoglobin A1C, which is kind of your average blood sugar over a 3-month period. And if you use that one, you want it to be less than 5.7. And then you're going to look at your HDL cholesterol. Most doctors will call that the good cholesterol. And they call it that because you actually do want this to be higher, which can be confusing to people. But you want your HDL to be above 40 if you're a man, and you want it to be above 50 if you're a woman. And then you look at your triglycerides. This we want to be lower. We want it under 150 for your triglycerides. So you can get those five things done pretty easily. And those are the measures of metabolic health, the markers of insulin resistance. If you have three or more of those that are in the unhealthy ranges, you have metabolic syndrome. And that means that you have a very high chance of having things like heart disease, diabetes, many forms of cancer are associated with the metabolic syndrome. The risk of Alzheimer's disease goes up with metabolic syndrome. So, it's not only about heart disease, it's really about all of the chronic diseases that we face. Only 7% of adults in the United States, as of the most recent, statistics we have, can meet all five measures of optimal metabolic health. So they, 5 out of 5 of those are in the healthy range. That is only 7% of the adults in the United States.
If you don't know where or how to get blood work done, I've ordered my blood work at home for years. Like Dr. Ovadia was saying, this is now a more common thing where, yes, you can go to your doctor and see what blood work they will cover and run. Most can do a standard blood panel of around 19 different blood markers. I'm not sure most insurances won't cover certain blood work, but for me, I've kind of just bypassed all of that and I will order blood work from home. My husband and I actually used to go through a more expensive blood work option, but we've recently found a more affordable option for us to get over 100 lab tests run. We're now going through Function Health, where essentially how it works is we go online, fill out a basic questionnaire regarding our age, height, weight, activity levels, supplements, and other basic questions about our health. Then we're prompted to purchase our lab work. We can order additional panels if we'd like, but then we type in our zip code and it'll populate all the different testing locations nearby. They have over 2,500 testing locations nationwide, and we just schedule an appointment right there for which day and time we want to go and get our lab work done. We show up to the appointment, they draw our blood, and in a few weeks, we get the results. They do tests for all the things that Dr. Ovadia just listed, things like fasting insulin, A1C, triglycerides, HDL, and all of the other blood test markers that I care about, as far as things like vitamin D, ferritin, thyroid panel. They give my biological age, and so many other tests. Like I said, over 100 tests. So for us, it's been a really simple, easy, and affordable way to get our lab work done. And right now, Function does have a wait list, but they're offering my audience a way to bypass and skip the wait list. So in order to do that, go to the URL functionhealth.com/Lillie Kane, or you can find more information and that link in the video description. So let's say somebody does their waist to height ratio and they go and they get their blood work done and they realize, oh my goodness, I have metabolic syndrome. Now, what should that person do? Like, what action steps should they do first?
Yeah, the first thing that I think you need to do is start eating whole real food and as low carbohydrate as possible, right? This is where some of the nuance starts to come in. Fruits, for instance, are not necessarily a bad food, but if you are already insulin resistant, if you already have metabolic disease, your body can't process carbohydrates until your body recovers. Once you're metabolically healthy, if you want to consume fruit, I don't have a problem with it. But if you're not metabolically healthy, fruit can be problematic. And even the higher carbohydrate vegetables are problematic. So you really want to stick to very low carbohydrate foods, which are going to be your animal products that have very minimal carbohydrates in them. And then your lower carbohydrate vegetables, your green fibrous vegetables, those can be tolerated as well.
Could you give an example of like breakfast, lunch, and dinner if someone was like, okay, you know what, I fall into this category. I want to start taking action and changing what I'm eating. What on earth you're saying, like meat and vegetables? Like, what does a plate look like?
Yeah. So when most people start doing this, they get hungry less often, and that's good. That's part of the point. Many people I know don't end up eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? They might only eat two meals in a typical day. But some breakfast ideas are going to be eggs and meat of some sort, whatever meat you like, steak and eggs, bacon and eggs, ground beef and eggs, whatever works for you, great. If you want to do some like plain, unsweetened yogurt, that's fine as well. Some cheeses. And then, lunch and dinner, right? In the traditional sense, it's going to be mostly meat. And then, like I said, if you want to have some vegetables with it that are low carbohydrate vegetables, things like broccoli and cauliflower and other kind of green, higher fiber vegetables, you can. Now, one of the things I help people to understand is you don't necessarily need them. We've been programmed to believe that you need vegetables. And the truth is, you don't. The cow ate the vegetables for you. The cow is better at processing those vegetables, extracting the nutrients from those vegetables. And all of those nutrients we need are in the meat. This is something that is very, again, misunderstood and misrepresented when, you hear nutritionists and dietitians talking about all the great vitamins and nutrients that are in vegetables. For the most part, we as human beings can't extract those nutrients and minerals from the vegetables. The ruminant animals, like cows, that have the multiple stomachs and put these vegetables through all different sorts of digestive processes that we can't do, they do a much better job of extracting the nutrients. So, a carnivore diet is a valid dietary option. It provides us with all the nutrients that we need to survive, and you can do it long term, despite what you hear out there. There's always this misinformation out there about carnivore diets being nutrient deficient or not being sustainable for the long term. And it's simply not true. Human beings have been existing on a primarily carnivorous diet for our vast, for the vast majority of our existence as human beings. Widespread agriculture only came into our abilities very recently in history. And for the vast majority of time before that, we existed on a largely carnivorous diet. So it is possible, it is an option. Like I said, it may not be necessary for everyone to do pure carnivore diet or a high percentage carnivore diet, but it is an option. And probably the biggest myth that, I need to dispel on a regular basis is red meat is not bad for your heart.
What about fiber? That's usually the question I get when I mention carnivore. When you said, it has all the nutrients, people go, but what about fiber? I'm like, fiber, that's not okay. What do you think about fiber?
Yeah, fiber is not essential to the human diet. We do not need fiber to exist. The only benefit to fiber that has ever been shown is when it replaces processed food, it improves health. But that in no way means that fiber is essential. The vast majority of fiber that humans consume is not digestible. It passes through us, right? And somehow this is thought that this is a good thing, right? It's kind of like, I don't know, cleaning things out as it goes through your intestines. But the fact that we can't absorb it should tell us that it's really not necessary to us. And as I said, there's scientific literature to support this. And there's a large community of experience now that supports that fiber is not essential to human health.
So, when you had mentioned that even the foods that we're eating are kind of sometimes based on the people who are around, I feel like nowadays society and just the social norm is like you have those things, and if you don't, then your friends don't want to be around you, or your family's going to question you and have some things to say because it's hard to eat whole foods. It seems like nowadays. So, for you, when you were getting off of eating the processed foods, or even if you talk to patients about coming off of them, how do you help people overcome the hurdle of social norms and just being in society?
Yeah, I think it starts with understanding why this is important to you, right? And if you can explain to people, and really you don't need to explain to people, but if you're able to communicate, to people why you're doing this, you're trying to improve your health and your health is important to you because you want to grow up and, see your kids and your grandkids, grow up and all of that. If someone kind of questions that, right, and tells you you should go against that, then that person isn't really a friend or isn't someone you really want in your life. And that's an unfortunate reality of things these days, right? We have people in our lives that maybe we shouldn't have in our life, and that sounds kind of harsh, but it's the truth, right? And ultimately, if you want better results than the people around you are getting, you have to do something different than what the people around you are doing. I think it was Einstein that said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. And you just look around our society these days, and everyone is sick. The food that we're eating is a large part of why that is. And so if you think that you can keep eating that same stuff and get different results, that's pretty foolish to think. And instead, if you're making the conscious decision that you want to do better than that when it comes to your health, eating better food is a big part of that. And if the people around you just can't understand that and can't support you in that, might be time to get different people around you.
They say that you are the average of the 5 people who you spend your most time around, and I even personally find it's hard to find like-minded people. How do you find people who they wanna care about their health and they wanna eat good foods?
We have lots of amazing opportunities to do that these days, right? Our circle isn't necessarily confined to the people that are in geographical proximity to us anymore, like it used to be. And there are so many amazing communities now around health online that you can get onto. Now, there are so many people waking up to this and doing this that likely you can find people close to you. It just might take a little bit of effort. Even small things like, when you're in the supermarket and you're kind of looking what other people are buying, right? And if you see someone that, their cart looks like yours, right? They only have some meat and maybe a little bit of veggies. Don't be afraid to go up and like kind of start that conversation. It's likely that they're going to be aligned with your way of thinking. And then, community events even that are popping up around this. Don't be shy about this as well. Because one of the other things I've discovered is this movement is definitely growing. And the more you're sort of public about what you're doing, you'll attract other people that are doing it as well.
One of the other pillars you had mentioned was sleep. Why does sleep play a role in becoming metabolically healthy? Could somebody just change their food and then still be able to see reduction in some of their blood test markers? Could they still lose weight? How come sleep plays a role?
Yeah, you can definitely do this with food alone, right? I know people who don't exercise and don't really work on their sleep, and they still see significant improvements. Now, sleep and metabolic health is actually a bi-directional relationship. So, what I mean by that is when you're metabolically unhealthy, your sleep tends to be worse. And if you have worse sleep, it tends to make your metabolic health worse. We need sleep, right? Our body needs to be able to rest and recover. Some of the things that we see is when someone doesn't get good quality sleep, and it's important to differentiate, it's not really about the amount of sleep, it's about how much of that sleep is good quality sleep. I do see people that get by with 5, 6 hours of sleep, but they sleep well. And so that's enough for them. I see other people on the other end of the scale that sleep 10, 11, 12 hours, but it's poor quality sleep and they don't do well with that. But when we don't get enough quality sleep, it tends to make us hungrier. It tends to increase a lot of these hormones that drive the metabolic disease, things like cortisol that can raise your blood sugar and your blood pressure. But that's what we see happen when we get poor sleep. And the other interesting thing that I've now seen over and over again, though, is when people start to improve their metabolic health and their insulin resistance starts to get better and they institute these dietary changes, that alone makes their sleep better. So it works both ways. But ultimately, yeah, if you're kind of chronically sleep deprived, it's going to be very difficult to maintain good metabolic health.
What are 4 things you avoid as a heart surgeon? It could be foods, but it could also be, alcohol or cigarettes or non-exercise or, overstressing. What are 4 things you avoid as a heart surgeon?
Yeah, so processed food is certainly first and foremost on that list. That I do my best to avoid as much as possible because I think that is the primary driver of heart disease. I certainly don't smoke. There is nothing that would suggest that that is good for our health, so I'll put that one on the list as well. More and more, I would say that one of the things I try to avoid is negative people. People that are just trying to get you to not do this. Those people we were talking about earlier that said, "Oh, just enjoy the whatever it is, the cake, the candy, the stuff." When you're saying, "No, I'm trying to really maintain my health," I avoid those people, and even more so than the people that are kind of critical of your food choices, the people that are telling you you can't improve, you can't get better. Those are people that I really try and avoid a lot these days, so I'll put that on the list. And What else do I avoid as a heart surgeon? I'd like to say I avoid stress, but the reality is I don't. I just think I've found better ways of dealing with stress these days. I guess another thing I'll say is I try and avoid becoming too comfortable. If you think you found the perfect answer, right, and you think there's nothing more to kind of learn about life, I think that's a bad attitude to have. So I always try and stay a little bit uncomfortable and be looking at things and changing things up so that I can be continually improving.
I know you kind of took this one back and didn't put it in the four, but you had mentioned that you've been working on ways to lower your stress. What are the things that you've been doing to help you with reducing your stress?
First of all, what I'll say is when my metabolic health improved, the way I reacted to stress improved. The stress didn't change, but the way I reacted to it. And we have evidence now that this has to do with the brain chemistry and the hormones. And when the brain is being fed primarily by sugar, it causes issues. And when we can switch to that fat burning, ketogenic metabolism, the brain works better. I look at the work of people like Christopher Palmer and Georgia Ede, who are just doing amazing things in this kind of blossoming field of metabolic psychiatry. And they're addressing advanced psychiatric conditions with food, changing food that the people are eating. And they're seeing amazing results from that. So I think there is something to being metabolically healthy, just helping us deal more with stress and improving our mental well being. Physical activity, I think, can be a great way to help kind of offload and deal with stress. Taking walks or more vigorous exercise is a great way for a lot of people to offload stress. And ultimately, I think it does come down to recognizing and having gratitude for the positive things in your life and focusing on those things more than the negative things.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Every time I start my morning, I write down 3 things that I'm grateful for, and in doing so, it already puts me in a space of just reflecting on the emotions of goodness because a lot of us have so many blessings in our day, but we only focus on the traffic, the mean thing somebody said about us, the non-job promotion, all the different stresses in life that we can be like, oh, I wish I had a better house, a more successful job, a better relationship. And especially with social media nowadays, we're comparing ourselves constantly to people that we're so focused on the negative that if I can just at least start my morning in a way of gratitude and giving thanks for my blessings, then I have more blessings come my way as a result of my energy. So I really agree with what you're saying with that. And one of the first thing that you said you avoid as a heart surgeon is processed foods. And you have mentioned sugar a few times too. What about processed foods is so bad? Is it, you haven't mentioned seed oils. Is it sugar? Is it just because there's ingredients on there we can't recognize? Like, why are processed foods so bad?
Yeah, the answer to that is yes. It's all of it, right? And I know that people are always trying to figure out, is it sugar? Is it processed carbohydrates? Is it the seed oils? And the truth is, I think all of it is bad. If you just eliminate the processed food, you eliminate all of it and you really don't have to worry about, which one it might be. Um, I have concerns about the seed oils, maybe more so than the sugar, in the sense of sugar does occur naturally in our environment. We have been exposed to sugar throughout our existence. Seed oils are a very new thing in our food environment. And I don't think that we are able to metabolize them and process them well. And mechanistically, I see the damage that seed oils can do to our mitochondria, to our cell walls that lead to these things like insulin resistance. But I also can't ignore, the significant increases that we've seen in sugar intake and processed carbohydrate intake, and that contributes as well. So that's why I just kind of try and keep it simple and stick to the eat whole real food. And if you're doing that, you're really not going to be exposed to any of those things in large quantities, and you'll end up with better health.
I feel like a lot of us know that if we want to be healthier, we should eat less processed foods, drink less alcohol, go to bed earlier, exercise, and yet people still don't do it and take the action to change. Usually it's not until someone hits rock bottom that they then, oh, okay, you know what? I need to clean up my act. So, what advice do you have for the person who they want to be healthier, but they just can't seem to take the action?
Yeah, the most powerful thing here is why. In order for someone to do this and to stick with it, they have to know why they're doing it. And it's not enough to say, I want to be in good health, right? Why do you want to be in good health? Why is that important to you? And you kind of have to keep digging, right? Each time you ask why, you get another layer deeper. They say that you have to get to that seventh level of why to really understand why you're doing something. And when you really understand why you're doing something, then it becomes sustainable, right? Because then you can say, is eating this candy as important to me as seeing my grandchildren grow up, whatever it might be for you. But that's what's going to get you through this challenging time. None of this is easy to implement. I always tell people, right? It's a simple concept, eat real food, but it's not easy to implement. And you really need to know why you're doing it to be able to do it successfully and put it into practice every day.
I guess my last question is, what question am I not asking, or I should be asking, that you think most people would want to know from a heart surgeon?
Yeah. So the other topic I usually like to talk about is how do you figure out if you have heart disease and how do you figure out at an early point? And this, the number one test that I recommend for people that is severely underutilized is something called a coronary artery calcium scan. And that is a very good screening test for heart disease. It's not the definitive test. It doesn't tell you everything you need to know, but I highly encourage people to get coronary artery calcium scans. For people that aren't familiar with them, they are very easy to do. No IV needed. You literally just lay down. It's done with a CAT scan machine, and you lay down, and it takes about 5 minutes, and you get a picture of your heart that's going to show you heart disease at its earliest stages. It's kind of like a mammogram for the heart. We pick these things up early and then we can deal with them. And if you pick it up early and you stop it from getting worse, you can make sure it doesn't become a problem in your life. It's an easy test to do. It's relatively inexpensive, usually $100 or less in most places here in the US. Unfortunately, it's not covered by insurance a lot of the time, but it's a good investment in your health. And that's probably the number one test I recommend for people to get to know where they stand regarding heart disease.
You can find Dr. Ovadia's website, social media handles, information about his telehealth, and all things to get in connection with Dr. Ovadia in the video description. Don't be silly, subscribe to Lillie, and I'll see you in the next one.